Today we're going to sew smart for the car. We're going to make a car travel bag where children can put their books and pencils and things in. It's got a handle that goes over the headrest of the front passenger and driver's seat so they can keep everything neat and tidy in the car. I think you'll enjoy this one. It's a really nice thing to make. So to make this bag, we're going to start by making the front of the bag first, but you will need for the bag, you'll need some really bright fabric. I've chosen Jigsaw fabric because I had it. Originally on the pattern, when I designed the first pattern, I used stripe fabric. You will need black homespun, some very thin fusible bias tape, a piece of black elastic, and you will need some lightweight wadding. For the first square on the front of the bag, I have got 4 6-inch coloured squares, and what I have done is I have marked a 3.5-inch square and a 2-inch square. Out of each of these I will cut the 3.5 and the 2-inch square out. I'm going to put some Visifix, which is adhesive applique paper, on the back of the 2.5-inch square, so it will end up looking like this when I trace the template for the tongue on it, and I will cut out the tongue for each square. So you've got 4 3.5-inch squares and 4 2-inch squares with the tongues cut out. And what I will do is I'll peel the paper off, and then I will show you how that goes together to make the centre square. So I've ironed on the little applique tongues. I've done the red onto the blue onto the green onto the yellow, and the yellow onto the red. And when they're all pushed together, you'll see that makes the little jigsaw pattern. But what I'm going to do next is I'm going to actually flip these over, pin along here. I'm going to sew those two seams together first, and then I will sew the top pieces to the bottom. And then I'll come back, because after that we'll need to put on the fusible bias tape to outline the jigsaw. I've stitched the top to the bottom. Now I have pressed my seams open, and there's a reason for that, because I'm going to now start doing, on the horizontal first, I'm going to start putting my bias tape. Now remember, it's adhesive on the back, so I'm going to iron it on gently, a little bit at a time, and feed it right around the jigsaw pieces. And take care in doing that. There is a handy hint. I think number 19, I've done a handy hint on applying this fusible bias tape. It's very easy to do, but it's worth the effort of taking a bit of extra time to get it really nice and neat round. So you're going to feed it around there, across there, down there, on the horizontal line first, and then you're going to do the same again all the way up here on the vertical line. Now, if you have a twin needle and you prefer to use that, the tape is just wide enough for the twin needle, but I do a line, one sewing line on one edge and one on the other, just to secure it. So I just thought I'd show you. I've ironed the first line on. See the difference that makes? Just pay a little attention as you're stitching it on to make sure you get the corners nice and neatly. One corner does tend to go on better than the others, you'll find, but you can move it around a bit and make it really quite perfect. So that's the first line I've ironed on, and I'm now going to iron the second line on, and then I will stitch the tape down. The next step is I've cut some strips 2.5 inches wide of the black homespun. So now I'm going to pin and stitch onto the top and the bottom two pieces that measure exactly the same as my square. Now the square should measure just about 6.5 inches square, but sometimes by the time you've put this on, it can pull it in a little bit. So as you'll see, I have got just a tad more than 6.5, but that will be all right. I'm going to pin it top and bottom, stitch it on, and then I'm going to measure along here and cut two pieces that length to go on the sides, and that will make the square bigger. So there were the two short pieces which I put on the top and the bottom. I measured the square to make sure it fitted. Then I've measured again along here, cut cross cut the 2.5 inch strips to fit the sides. Both sides are on, giving it a press. Press your seams to the outer edge. Now I've cut 2 pieces of my print fabric and measured along the bottom here. Put those on there. I'm going to stitch one on the top and one on the bottom, and then I will measure again and put 2 pieces, one either side, to make a bigger square. So I've put the second border on. I put the measured along there and put the top and bottom on, and then did the same on the side. And the only thing left now to do for the front of the bag is put this little narrow strip here. I think it's 1 1/4. I will just check. Actually 1.5 inch strip on the top. So whichever way you want it round, put this on the top. So I'm going to pin it and stitch this little 1.5 inch strip on the top, and that will be our front of the bag finished. The top strip, the 1.5 inch strip, has been stitched on. Seams again pressed to the outside, and that is our top of the bag. The front of the bag is now complete. Next step will be the back. So that there's the completed front. Now we're going to do the back. Just a quick reminder, if you happen to be using a stripe and the stripes, say, went vertically, make sure that these 2 short pieces also have the stripes going vertically, or vice versa if your stripes are coming out horizontally, because it makes a difference. It makes this panel here, this square here, look as if it's just popped on the top of the fabric. Now because I've used jigsaw fabric, I've tried to keep the same pieces, but the side pieces are slightly different, but you don't notice it because of the pattern. So just bear that in mind. So all we do for the back now is I've got my 1.5 inch strip. This piece is cut the same size as this. And as you know, I added the 1.5 inch strip on the top. So I'm now going to pin and sew the 1.5 inch strip along the top in the same way, and then that will be my front and my back completed. The next step is to pin 2 pieces of wadding the same size as your bag front and back, pin them to the wrong sides and trim. Now you'll see you've got a little bit showing here because wadding, as you know, does stretch a little bit sometimes, so I'll trim that piece off just down here. Trim that piece of wadding off, and any that I've got left over at the top when I've done that. And because that's the front of my bag, I'm now going to, I'll trim that off in a second, with right sides together. That's the back, this is the front. I'm going to put the right sides together and pin all the way around the out edges. Leave the top, don't sew the top. So all the way around here on the edge side, so the right, left side and the bottom. So use a generous 1/4 inch seam for that, because afterwards you can trim a little bit of this wadding back, and it's easier if you have just a generous 1/4 inch instead of just a plain one. So I've turned my bag to the right side just so that you can see the bag is finished now, the outer bag. This is what I meant. I have cut the wadding back to within a little of the stitch line. I don't like bulky seams, and so I just cut it back that much, and it makes it a lot easier, a lot neater when it's finished. So that's our front and back bag. That's the basic bag is finished. I'm going to set that aside, and next we're going to work on the pocket that goes on the inside of the lining. So the next step, as I said, is going to be the pocket. Now you can make your pocket as big or as small as you want. Obviously you don't have to do it the size I'm doing mine. Mine is almost the width of the bag, but what you'll do is you'll take your piece of fabric for your pocket, fold it in half. Now this is the top side of the pocket, so you don't need to stitch along here, you will just stitch along here. Leave a gap of about, I would leave about 4 or 5 inches. Just put a pin in there so that you can hopefully see that. Just leave a gap there. So start sewing a good 1/4 inch, generous 1/4 inch I should say, seam along there and up to the top fold, and the same on this side along there and up to the top fold there, and then turn it to the right side. That's why you're leaving the gap, and then just either slip stitch or machine stitch across the gap. I've stitched my pocket together. That's a good generous seam, so I haven't slip stitched it. I will, or I machine it when I machine the pocket on to the lining of the bag. That will easily catch in, so it isn't really essential for me to do that. I will have a machine stitch along instead. Now halfway along the width here, make a mark, and then 2.5 inches in from that mark, line it up, we're going to make a buttonhole. Now the reason for this is the pocket goes onto the lining and we want to secure it, so when you put your hand in the pocket or pencils or whatever that goes in the pocket, it will be secure just here, and it will stay, it won't bag, it will stay quite secure on the lining. So I'm going to put a buttonhole right here, 2.5 inches in. So I'll just make that line, chalk line, a bit wider so you can see. So I'm going to put my buttonhole from there to there, and then I'll come back and show you about, we're going to put some elastic along here and stitch it down just to hold pencils or something like that. So the button just goes nicely through the buttonhole. You can't see it unfortunately because it's black, but before I do a buttonhole I always practice on my old scrap piece of fabric, and when I've got I have an automatic buttonholer, but to make sure it's big enough I just pop the unpicker in and then take a tiny pair of scissors and just snip right to the end, both ends, and make sure that my button will go through. So always practice your buttonhole before you do it onto your main fabric. So that's on. Now the button will be sewn on to the lining and picking up the wadding as well to make it more stable. So we'll put the button to one side and then we're going to put on the elastic for the pencils. So I'm going to mark a line 2.5 inches from this top edge. There's my buttonhole. You probably can't see it very well because, as I said, it's black. But I'm going to just mark a line across there, just a white chalk line, and on the other side 2.5 inches again from the top, just a little line across there, because I'm going to sew on the elastic. I'm not going to stitch it on obviously on the horizontal way. I'm going to stitch it, say there, and another there, and another there, just the width of a pen or a pencil. So if you put your pen down and then you put your elastic onto the line, you'll see roughly how much you need to just leave it, stitch it across there and across there, just to slip a pen through. So it'll be like little loops to put pens through. So do as many as you can on that side and as many as you want to do on the other side, just stitching the elastic every so often to put your pens through. When I stitched my elastic down, I did a little like satin stitch or tiny weeny zigzag, because that gives the elastic just a bit more stability. So you can see I've made small little pockets for the pens. That will be for another little pen, all the way along on this side to the button and on the other side. And now we're going to stitch the pocket onto the lining. So we've finished now our little pocket, and it has to go onto the lining. Now my lining is cut 33 inches by 15 inches. All the sizes are on the pattern of everything that you will need to cut. Now because this is my pocket, this is my lining, but the plain piece of lining has to be on the front inside, because the pocket needs to be on the back inside the bag. So I have marked a line, a chalk line, 3 inches from the top on the inside, and I'm going to line my pocket up on that line, centering it as best as I can. Now I'm doing it just by my eyes, but you can measure it perfectly if you choose to. And I'm going to sew 1/4 of an inch all the way down there, across the bottom and up this side. Leave the top open obviously, because that's going to form the pocket. The buttonhole is there, I'll stitch the button on the back, but make sure as you stitch around that you catch all your seam in. Now I've still got my gap at the bottom to catch in, so I must make sure I catch that in all the way round. And then the pocket is securely onto the lining. My pocket's now stitched on. Do remember, back stitch at the beginning and the end. This is the folded edge at the top, the buttonhole, the elastic pieces, but back stitch here as you start and you finish, because you need extra strength there. I could have left the pocket just with a seam straight up instead of putting a button on, but I like to leave this as a fairly big pocket for a tablet or a book or whatever, or Kleenex box or something to go in, just anything bigger. So that's why the button is there, to secure it. Now, because this pocket has to go on the inside of the bag at the back, we're going to have to now stitch the lining up. Now look, the lining, if I put the lining next to the bag, is just a little bit bigger. I might trim that down because I don't like the lining being creased when it's inside the bottom of the bag, but you've got room to trim it off a little bit if you choose. Now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to sew a generous, quite generous 1/4 inch seam. I would say 3/8 down here. And this side I'm going to do the same, but I'm going to leave about a 5 inch gap, maybe 6 inch gap, because I will need to turn this when it's fastened to the top, stitched to the top of the bag. The whole thing needs to go inside out, so you must leave a gap to turn it. On one side, a 5 inch gap. So remember, when you start and when you finish, back stitch to give it strength. So this is the back of my bag, this is the front. I've laid it down this way because I'm now going to put, now I've stitched and I've left my gap for turning, I need to put the pocket, which is on the back panel, it needs to go on the back on the inside of the bag. So I'm going to slip right sides together, I'm going to slip this into here. Take a little time because it is a bit fidgety to do. Push it right down. Push your lining right down. Now this obviously is the main bag. I want to pin the side seams together. I'm just going to pop a pin in there. On that side, you'll find you'll keep pushing it down because the lining needs to be just that little bit smaller than the top bag. And this side, I'm going to match this up. I'll pop another pin in here just to line those up, and then I'm going to stitch all the way around the top edge using a good 1/4 inch stitch again, seam allowance again, and then I will turn it all inside out through the gap that we left on the side. I stitched around the top all the way around, seam to seam. I've left my gap. Now we're going to pull the whole bag through the little gap, just like that. And I'm going to push the lining down into the bag, but I will close, before I do that, I will just close this little gap that I left here for turning. I've turned the bag to the right side through the little gap and stitched up the gap of the lining. So you see you've got your pocket on the back panel inside. There's your buttonhole. So I have marked a space, a little line there for my button to be stitched on, and I will just catch in the wadding, not the back fabric, just the wadding, and this to put the button on there and stitch the button on. And it's a good idea to just 1/4 of an inch stitch a top stitch around the top. Gives it a bit more strength around the top, because people will be putting their hands in all the time, and it just makes this a bit stronger around the top. Then all we have left to do is make the handle that will go over the headrest on the front passenger seat or driver's seat, and then the bag will just drop down and sit in the back for the back passengers. Top stitching is all done. The button's been sewn on and the buttonhole just like that. Pop that through there. So I'm now going to set my bag aside while we make the handles. For the handle, I have got a piece roughly about 24 by 3.5 inches wide of the homespun. I'm going to fold that in half, place on the top 24 inches by about 1 3/4 inch piece of wadding, very lightweight wadding. So I'm going to stitch down the raw, pin and stitch down the raw edge right the way down here, and then turn it inside out and stitch across each end to neaten it. So I've turned the handle inside out, and I've just tucked the ends in and stitched across the ends, but I've also stitched at 1/8 of an inch down both sides, and that's just to secure the wadding that's inside the handle. And take your time with that. Now remember, this is going over the back. It will go over the back of a headrest in your car. You only need one handle. That can be a bit confusing sometimes to think you've only got one handle on a bag. And I'm going to mark 2 inches in from the top here, and just put a chalk mark on my bag there, just 2 inches down on both sides, and I'm going to stitch center the handle and stitch it on there, going round there to the top, and the same on the other side. Make sure you don't get a twist in your handle so that your bag will end up with one handle that side and one that. It would just be one single handle on the top. So I have stitched my handle on the 2 inches down. On the outside you can see you just got a little stitch line there, which really doesn't matter, and it's not twisted. So now your bag is ready to put in the car, and you've got the pocket with space in, you've got the pencil space, you've also got this lovely big bag that you can put books or toys or clothing, anything in for your journey. And I think your children will just be really happy with that, and your car will appreciate it too. The pattern for this bag is in my Etsy shop, so go and have a look, because there's lots of patterns in there that I've created. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because it won't be long before I'm able to come back with a new project.